The debt collector arrived on a Tuesday, which Mara always thought was a cruel thing. Tuesdays were supposed to be nothing days, quiet days, the kind of day you hung laundry and forgot about. He came with 2 men behind him and a paper in his hand, and he didn't knock. The door of the mercantile swung open hard enough to knock the little bell off its hook. It hit the floor and rolled under the counter, and nobody picked it up. Mara was in the back, cutting fabric for old Hetty Parcell's curtains, and she heard the bell fall, and she knew, the way you know sometimes, the way your stomach knows before your brain catches up. She set down the scissors. The man's all anyone called him, just Lorcan. And he worked for the bank in Harwick, which was 40 miles east, and might as well have been another world. He wore a clean coat in a town where nobody had clean coats, and he had the kind of eyes that never moved off what they were looking at. He was looking at her father's ledger, which he'd pulled from behind the counter without asking. "Miss Aldridge," he said, not looking up. Mara came through the curtain that separated the back room from the front. Her hands were still holding the fabric scissors, and later she would think that was the only reason she didn't fall apart right then. Having something to hold. "That's mine," she said, meaning the ledger. "It's the bank's," Lorcan said. "Same as the building, same as the stock." He set the ledger down flat on the counter, like he was closing a door. "Your father left a considerable sum outstanding. You've had notice." She had 3 notices, each one arriving like a small death. She'd written back each time. She'd offered payments, a schedule, the kind of reasonable arrangement that reasonable men accepted. Lorcan, apparently, was not a reasonable man, or maybe the bank wasn't. She'd never been sure which was worse. "I need more time," she said. "You've had time." He looked around the mercantile, at the bolts of cloth, the canned goods lined up like soldiers, the case of seed packets her father had ordered special from a catalogue back east before he got sick. "We'll be taking inventory on Friday. Whatever can be sold will be applied to the debt. Whatever can't." He paused, and she understood. The pause was deliberate, that he was letting her feel the weight of what came after. "You'll need to vacate." The 2 men behind him were looking at the floor, which meant they'd done this enough times to be embarrassed by it. Mara stood in her father's store, the store he'd built with her mother before Mara was born, the store where she'd learned to count using dried beans on the windowsill, the store that smelled like sawdust and coffee, and the particular sweetness of the tobacco her father kept behind the counter in a tin with a dented lid. And she did not cry. She thought about crying. She felt the pressure of it behind her eyes, that specific ache, but she looked at Lorcan's clean coat, and she decided she would not give him that. "Friday," she said. "Friday," he agreed, and put the ledger under his arm, and left. The bell was still on the floor. She stood there a long time before she picked it up. Harwick had a boarding house, but it ran $4 a week, which was $4 more than Mara had. It had a church, but the minister's wife had 3 children already living in their back room, and looked at Mara with kind, exhausted eyes that said everything without saying anything. It had a saloon, 2 liveries, a blacksmith, and a woman named Opal, who took in washing. What Harwick had, as it turned out, was a notice board outside the land office. Mara had walked past it 100 times. It was where people posted claims and disputes and the occasional notice of a lost mule. She stopped in front of it on Thursday morning, the day before Lorcan was coming back with his inventory list, and she read it the way drowning people read things, looking for anything that floated. Most of it was the usual. A land claim, a notice about a disputed fence line, an advertisement for a dentist who visited the 3rd week of each month, and then, down in the corner, tacked up with a single nail, seeking a woman of capable character for frontier homestead, must be willing to work hard and live simply, fair wages, no nonsense tolerated in either direction. Inquire at Delma's livery, ask for Strand. She read it 3 times, no nonsense tolerated in either direction. That was an odd thing to put in a notice. It meant something, she thought. It meant the man who wrote it had been on the receiving end of nonsense before, and didn't intend to be again. She pulled the notice down, put it in her pocket, stood on the street in the October wind, with her coat buttoned wrong because she'd been in a hurry that morning, and hadn't noticed until now. Then she walked to Delma's livery. The man at the livery said Strand had already gone, said he'd come in 2 days ago, asked them to post the notice, bought a bag of oats and some harness hardware, and ridden north. North where? Mara asked. The man shrugged. He had the particular lack of curiosity that came from spending all your time with animals. Up the ridge. Past the tree line, I expect. He's got a place up there. Been there years. Does he have a name? A first name? Calloway, the man said. That's what folks call him, Calloway Strand. He said it the way people say names that carry weather with them. She borrowed a pencil and paper from the land office and wrote a note. Left it with the livery man in case Calloway Strand came back. Then she went home back to the store, which was still hers until tomorrow. And she sat on her father's stool, behind the counter, and she thought very carefully about what she was willing to do, and what she wasn't. She was 26 years old. She had $30 in a tin under the floorboard, which she hadn't told Lorcan about and didn't intend to. She had the fabric scissors, which were her mother's, and a winter coat with a torn hem, and she was not, she had decided, going to let Lorcan's clean coat be the last thing that won. In the morning she packed a bag. She left the key on the counter. And she rode north. She almost didn't find it. The trail up the ridge was less a trail than a suggestion. A narrowing of trees, a series of rocks that might have been placed deliberately, or might have just fallen that way. The horse she'd borrowed from the livery man cost her 8 of her $30, a negotiation that had taken 40 minutes and left both of them dissatisfied. Picked her way up with the plodding patience of an animal that had no feelings about the situation either way. It was cold, the kind of cold that lives in the trees and comes out when you pass through. She smelled the smoke before she saw the cabin. Then she came through a stand of firs, and there it was, lower than she'd imagined, built into the slope like it was trying to become part of the mountain. A woodpile along the east wall that was taller than she was, a lean-to with a mule and 2 horses inside, shifting in the shadows, and a man standing in the yard with an axe, looking at her. He was large in the way that some men are large, not soft large, but made of something solid large, the kind of size that accumulates over years of doing hard things. He had a beard that had gone past the point of intention, and a coat that had been patched so many times the original color was a philosophical question. Maybe less. Hard living adds years to a face. He did not move toward her. He did not move away. He just stood there with the axe at his side and looked at her the way you look at weather, assessing, neutral, not yet decided. "I'm looking for Calloway Strand," she said. "Found him," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Most of the big ones had voices to match, but his was quiet, like something he'd learned to keep that way. "I saw your notice," Mara said. She reached into her coat pocket and held it up, still folded. "At the land office in Harwick." He looked at the paper. "That was a week ago." "I know. I had things to settle." She didn't say what things. He didn't ask. He looked at her for a moment longer, at the single bag tied to the saddle, at the horse that was clearly not hers, at the torn hem of her coat that she'd had no time to fix, and something moved behind his eyes. Not pity. She would have turned around for pity. Something more like recognition, maybe. The way one person who's been through something looks at another person who's been through something. "You eaten?" he said. "Not since this morning." "Come in, then." He turned and walked toward the cabin. He didn't offer to take her horse or her bag. She discovered, looping the reins around a fence post and pulling her bag down herself, that this did not bother her. She wasn't sure what that meant about her, or about him. Maybe both of them had learned to skip over the things that didn't matter. Inside of the cabin was small and almost aggressively functional: a table, 2 chairs, a stove that was working very hard and doing well at it, shelves along one wall holding dried goods in clay jars, each one labeled in small, careful handwriting that surprised her. She'd expected a man who wrote no nonsense, tolerated in either direction, to have handwriting like a fence falling down, but his was precise, a bunk built into the far wall. Pelts stacked in the corner, traps hung by the door. He put a bowl in front of her without ceremony. Stew of some kind, thick enough to stand a spoon in. She ate it all. He sat across the table and drank coffee, and did not make conversation, which she appreciated more than she could explain. The thing about being in a desperate situation is that other people's cheerfulness becomes unbearable. He was not cheerful. He was just there, solid and quiet, like the cabin itself. "The work," she said when she'd finished. "What is it?" "Cooking. Keeping the place. I trap most of the winter, which means I'm out for stretches. Need someone to tend the animals, keep the stores from freezing, make sure the woodpile's stocked inside." He looked at his coffee. "I had a woman up here 2 winters back. Didn't stay." "Why not?" Said it was too quiet. Mara thought about the mercantile and Lorcan's footsteps coming through the door and the bell falling off the hook. "I don't have a problem with quiet," she said. He looked at her then. Really looked, the way he hadn't quite done before, or maybe she hadn't been paying attention. "What's your name?" "Mara Aldridge." "What happened to you, Mara Aldridge?" It wasn't an intrusive question. It was the same question she'd have asked if she were him, sitting across from a woman who'd ridden up a mountain alone, in October with 1 bag and a borrowed horse. "Bank took my father's store," she said. "He died in April, left debt. I tried to arrange payments, but they sent a man named Lorcan, and Lorcan doesn't arrange." Calloway said nothing. "I have nowhere to go," she said. I'm not saying it to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because you'll figure it out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me." He was quiet for a moment. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the firs. "I pay wages," he said. "Same as I said in the notice. It's not much, but it's something." "It's enough," she said, which was true. He nodded once. "The bunk's yours. I'll sleep in the lean-to when the weather's tolerable. When it isn't, there's a curtain." He stood, took her bowl, set it in the basin. "We start at first light. There's no use starting any other time." She slept that night under a wool blanket that smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and for the first time in 6 months, she did not lie awake, running numbers. The first week was calibration. Not between them, exactly, more between her and the place. The rhythm of a mountain winter was not a rhythm she knew. She'd spent her whole life behind a counter, indoors, measuring things in bolts and pounds and dollars. Up here things were measured in cords of wood and hours of light and the temperature of the animal's breath. She made mistakes. She oversalted the stew on the 2nd day. She let the fire get too low on the 3rd night and woke to frozen water in the basin. She didn't latch the lean-to door properly, and the mule got out, and it took her an hour in the dark to coax him back, cold and irritable, and fighting the urge to swear out loud at an animal that clearly didn't care. Calloway said nothing about any of it. He fixed the fire. He showed her, once, how to latch the lean-to door. Just demonstrated it. No lecture, no repetition. The next morning he brought in extra wood without comment. She was beginning to understand that this was his language. Not words, just doing. He came back from checking his trap lines on the 6th day, with a cut on his arm, long and shallow, where a branch had caught him. He mentioned it the way people mention the weather, matter of fact, almost incidental. "Sit down," Mara said. He blinked, like the instruction surprised him. "I'm not asking," he said. He sat. She cleaned the cut with the carbolic she'd found in the cabinet above the stove, and he didn't make a sound, just watched her hands work with the same neutral assessment he'd turned on her the first day. "You do this before," he said. "My father was sick for a year," she said. "You learn." She bandaged it. He flexed his hand once to test the wrap. Nodded. "Good," he said. He went back outside and split wood for another hour and a half. She watched him through the window for a moment. Not for any particular reason, she told herself, and then went back to the stove. The trouble came on a Wednesday. She heard the horses before she saw them. 2 of them, coming up the same trail she'd used. She was outside bringing in wood, and she stopped, arms full, watching the tree line. The men who came through were not from Hawick. She didn't know them, and didn't want to. They had the look of men who'd been cold a long time and blamed other people for it. One of them was young, barely more than a boy. The other was older, with a jaw like a fist. The older one scanned the yard, then settled his eyes on her. "Strand about," he said. "He's out," she said, which was true. He'd left at dawn for the upper trap lines and wouldn't be back until dark. "We'll wait," the man said, and swung down from his horse without being invited. She set the wood down on the porch. "What's your business with him?" "Our business," he said, which was its own kind of answer. The young one was looking at the cabin, at the door. She read the look without wanting to. "You're welcome to wait in the yard," she said. "I'll tell him you came by." The older one smiled. It was not a good smile. "Cold out here?" "Yes," she said, "it is." She stood in front of the door. She was aware of how thin her options were. One of them, stretched tight as new leather. The fabric scissors were inside, which was useless. The rifle she knew Calloway had was also inside, which was less useless, but she'd never fired a rifle in her life. She was calculating these things with a frightening calm when she heard the horse. Not 2 horses, 1 horse, coming fast down from the upper trail, which meant he'd come back the short way, which he only did, she'd learned, when he was in a hurry. Calloway came through the trees at a pace that meant he'd seen or heard something on his way down. He took in the yard in one look. The 2 horses, the 2 men, Mara standing in front of the door with her arms crossed and her jaw set. And he pulled up and dismounted in one motion. Landing without sound, he walked to stand beside her, not in front of her, beside. "Tell her," he said to the older man. No warmth, no cold, just the name acknowledged. Strand. The man called Teller shifted his weight. "We've been waiting. I see that." Calloway looked at Mara just briefly, a glance that asked a question she answered by staying where she was. "What do you want? That's between us." "Then say it, and we're done." Teller glanced at Mara. "In private." "She stays," Calloway said. It was not a discussion. It didn't sound like. Teller seemed to understand this, because his jaw moved and then went still. What he wanted, it turned out, was the eastern trap line. Calloway had registered it with the territory 3 years ago. Teller had apparently decided it should be his. He'd come up once before, Calloway said afterward. A year ago, with different men, and Calloway had said no then too. "It's registered," Calloway said. "Come up here again and I'll report it to the marshal in Hawick." "Hawick's a long way," Teller said. "So's the line between what I'll do and what I won't. Don't test it." There was a moment. She'd seen that kind of moment before. Not often, but enough to know it. The kind where the air holds everything still, while the men in it decide which way to fall. Teller's hand was near his belt. Calloway's were at his sides, loose and easy, which she knew by now meant nothing about what he was capable of. The young one spoke for the first time. "Come on," he said, low to Teller. "Come on." Teller held it a beat longer. Then he turned and mounted and rode back into the trees. Calloway didn't move until they were gone. Then he let out a long, slow breath and looked at her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes." She paused. "You came back early. Thought I saw tracks." "Different from mine." He looked in the direction the men had gone. "You stood in front of the door." "I did. You didn't have a weapon." "No," she said. He looked at her for a moment, with something on his face she hadn't seen before. Not approval, quite. Something more complicated than that. "Come inside," he said. "It's cold." She started teaching him to read labels on the seed packets. Not because he asked. He'd managed all this time without, but because she'd found him squinting at one of the jars on the shelf, holding it at arm's length, turning it in the light. "What does it say?" she asked. He put it down. "Doesn't matter." Fennel seed, she said. Or fenugreek. You mixed them up last week. He didn't say anything. The letters are almost the same at the start, she said. It's easy to confuse. He still didn't say anything, but he picked the jar back up. She started leaving things labeled with both name and a small sketch, not in a way that announced itself as a lesson, just a habit she developed, like the habit of banking the coals a certain way, or laying the kindling in the configuration he preferred. He started pointing to words occasionally, short ones, asking without asking, the way he did most things. December arrived with intention. 3 days of snow so heavy the world disappeared outside the windows. They were inside together more than they'd been since the beginning, and the cabin, which had seemed small, did not feel smaller. It felt, if anything, like the right size. She made bread. He sharpened things. She read aloud from the one book she'd brought. A collection of stories, nothing heavy, and he sat with his back against the wall, and his legs stretched out, and listened with his eyes closed. Twice he asked her to go back and read a part again. Once he laughed, not a big laugh, not a performance, just a sound of genuine amusement at something that caught him off guard, and she kept her eyes on the page so he wouldn't think she'd noticed. But she'd noticed. She was noticing a lot of things. The way he moved in a space, always aware of where everything was. The way he rationed praise like it was a finite resource, so that when he said good about something, she knew he meant it completely. The way he woke before dawn every morning, without apparent effort, and made coffee and sat by the window, and watched the dark thin out without needing anything from it. She caught herself, some mornings, listening for his footsteps. She wasn't sure what to do with that. She wasn't sure it needed doing anything with. He got sick in January. Not badly sick, but sick enough, a chest cold that dropped into his lungs and wouldn't let go. He refused to say anything about it for 2 days, and she only knew because his color was wrong, and he was coughing into his sleeve when he thought she wasn't looking. "Lie down," she said on the evening of the 3rd day. I'll check the traps," she said. "I know the way now." He looked at her. "Lie down, Calloway." He was still resistant. She could see it. The specific resistance of someone who has been solely responsible for their own survival for long enough that yielding feels like a structural flaw. "Let me," she said. And then, because she understood this language better than she'd realized, she just went and turned down the bunk and set the lamp on the shelf above it, and added wood to the stove until the cabin was warm enough that only a stubborn fool would stay upright. He lay down. He slept through most of 2 days. She checked the near trap lines. Not the far ones. She wasn't ready for the far ones. And tended the animals and kept the stove fed and made broth from the smoked venison in the cold chest and brought it to him in the bunk, without making a thing of it. On the 2nd evening she sat on the stool beside the bunk, and he looked at her from the pillow with eyes that were clearer than they'd been. "The animals," he said. "Fine. The near lines? Checked. 2 rabbits. I reset." He was quiet for a moment. "You reset them yourself. You showed me how in November you remembered. I remember things." Another quiet. The stove breathed. Outside the temperature was dropping and the trees were making their cold night sounds, the creaks and pops of wood contracting. "Mara?" he said. "Yes, the broth." She waited. "It was good," he said. He was looking at the ceiling when he said it, not at her, in the careful way of someone who is trying to say something else, and is not sure they're saying it right. She understood. "Get some sleep," she said. "You've got a lot of trap lines to ignore tomorrow." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. He was asleep in 20 minutes. He told her about the eastern trap line in February, about why it mattered, about what it meant. He'd come up here at 32, he said, after. And he paused there, long enough that she didn't push after. He'd built the cabin himself over 2 winters. Filed the land claim. Built the lines. He didn't explain what he was doing up here, or why he'd stayed, or what he'd been before, and she didn't ask because she understood that some things were not secret so much as private, and there was a difference. "I didn't want anyone here," he said. He was looking at the window, at the February light, pale and precise as a judgment. "When I put that notice up, why did you then?" He was quiet. "The first winter I didn't mind the quiet," he said. "The second was fine. The third—" He stopped. "There are nights when the only thing you hear is what's inside your own head, and it gets to be a lot." She thought about her father's store, about sitting on the stool in the dark after Lorcan left, about the bell on the floor. "Yes," she said, "I know." He turned from the window. "I thought someone coming up here to work would fix that." Did it? A long pause. He looked at her with the same look from November, the complicated one, the one that wasn't just assessment. "Differently than I expected," he said. The fire was low. She put another log on. When she turned back, he was still looking at her, and this time neither of them looked away for a moment. "I'm not going back to Harwick," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know," he said. "I'm not leaving in spring." "I know that too. I thought you should know that I know it," she said, which came out slightly more tangled than she'd intended, and he smiled. Not the small sound from December. Not the almost law. An actual smile, one side of his face giving way to it, his eyes going different. It was the first time she'd seen him smile. She thought it was probably not something he did often. She thought she didn't mind being the reason. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. Outside the mountain was white and massive and indifferent to everything below it, which Mara had once found terrifying. Now it felt like privacy, like the mountain was holding something in place. Both of them, separately for years, and now together, without comment and without condition, and without any intention of letting go. She went back to her stool. He went back to the leather he was working. The fire crackled between them. "All right." It was, she thought, exactly the right word.